Hey, what's up, geeks? Darron here. Just give you some background on myself. I'm the lead React Native developer for Peerspace. I have 6 years of professional React Native experience. I work for 3 Fortune 500 companies. That's Walmart, Discover Card, and General Motors. And yeah, I'm here to help you learn React Native as fast as possible. Now, before I got started, there was already a comment left by Code with Eric. It says, I want to be an expert like you. And I appreciate it, Eric. I wouldn't say I know everything about React Native. I just know enough about React Native to get paid to code as a React Native developer. But definitely, man, the goal of this is to help everybody become the best React Native developer that they can become, and then to proceed and do whatever else they want to do within their software development careers or entrepreneur goals or anything like that. Now, the purpose of today's video is to review the application that we built for the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks, we built the application that calls API data, pulls that data in, and we do that using Redux. So I teach you how to use Redux. I teach you how to create your own custom selectors, and also teach you how to use React navigation. Now, the thing that I'm learning as a teacher is that a lot of people, they're learning React Native at different levels. And a lot of people who have been watching it, they're new to just learning JavaScript itself. So I want to slow things down and go over things step by step. Also, if you have any kind of questions, make sure you ask those questions. Leave a comment, and I'll make sure I'll answer them in a timely manner. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Let's make sure. I use the WebStorm IDE. It's just a lot easier for me to understand what's going on and to code. All right. And I'm also going to open up my React debugger, React Native debugger. And I'm going to pull my phone out so it's easy for me to see these the questions that you guys ask while I'm speaking. Okay, cool. So I can see these comments as well. So I'll do this later. If you're not familiar with the React Native debugger, get familiar with it. I promise you, in the professional world, they're going to expect you to know how to use Flipper or React Native debugger. And I don't know why they want you to know how to do that. You can do all of this stuff using the regular console, but this is what they want. So if I were you, I would just say, yes, I've used the React Native debugger, and then tell them that, hey, it allows me to see my actions that are being called from Redux. But I'll just show you that right now in this example. So I'm going to debug with Chrome. Now you can see when I did that, the application completely reloaded. And the first action that is actually called when the application loads is pending. Pending is the first action, and with the pending call is basically making that API fetch to get the data. And in pending, the only thing that's changing that state value is loading. Is loading goes from false to true. Now, once that endpoint is successful or it fails, we call our next action. That action is fulfilled. And within that fulfilled action, what happens is loading converts from true to false. And the data goes from an empty array to a collection of different information of data. So if I go ahead and I take a look at my code, here's where all this logic takes place. I'm going to go into my Redux and my new slice. So I'm going to bring my debugger over here. So as you can see, when I take a look at my slice, the slice works just like a reducer if you have any experience with reducers. Now, if we take a look at the slice, we have a news slice. The name of the slice is news. It has an initial state, which is loading is false. The data is an empty array, and we have saved articles, which is an empty array. We have one action that we actually custom created ourselves, and that's the save articles action. Now, these are our API call actions, and this comes when you use create async thunk. So by default, whenever you use create async thunk, you have to create your actions using the extra reducer property. Now, as I stated within our React Native debugger, the first thing that actually occurs is pending, and pending says it's true, right? And then once we go from pending, which sets the state value as true, you go to fulfilled, which sets the state value as false and returns all this data. Now, right now in the app, I'm not doing anything with the loading property, but just for right now, I'm going to give you an example of what I can do with the loading property. So go to my home screen, and I'm going to grab, we already have our selector right here from React Redux. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to go into I'm going to create a variable called is load. I'm going to set this equal to use selector. My ID is slow for whatever reason. And I'm going to get the state value. That's going to be state dot news dot is loading. Okay. And right now within my news article, I'm going to I'll take this out of here. Go to my news article. Okay. And I'll do it here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in, I'm going to get my is loading property. And then from there, once I have my is loading property, I'm going to update the background style. So whenever is loading, like this. Yes. So whenever, how would I do this? Okay. Whenever is loading is true, I'm going to make the background color yellow. Whenever it's false, I'm going to make the background color I'll just say white. And I'll save it just like this. So everything looks good. And I'm going to log the is loading property just to make sure that it's changing. So I'll do console log is loading. And then set this from console.clear. And I see your question, Doug. How do people pull up the React Native debugger? I'll show you that in a second. Give me a second. I'll show you this example. So now when I go back to my debugger, I'm going to save this, go to my debugger. So it shows is loading is false. Now if I go ahead, well, let me remove this because it'll just re-update. So if I shake my simulator, as you can see, the is loading property, it goes from true, and it happens so fast. The default state is false. It goes to pending, which is true, and then it updates it to false again once it's fulfilled. Now, if I refresh this, I'm hoping that you can see the yellow background. That's the whole point. Okay, and that's exactly what happened. You can see that yellow background. So whenever it's loading, that lets you know that we have a yellow. Whenever the background is yellow, that lets you know that it is loading. Now, just to answer, let me go back to, go here, stop sharing my screen. Now, just to answer your question. Hey, what's up, man? It's always good seeing you. And it's Reggie, I believe. Yeah, so Reg, it's good seeing you. And then also, let me take a look at Doug. Doug Bones. How do you pull up the React Native debugger? I installed this a while ago. So you can actually, if you just Google React Native debugger, this is it right here. Yeah. Yeah, this is it. You're going to have to like Google React Native debugger, homebrew. Want to make sure there's not an easier way to do all this stuff. Here goes releases right here. Okay. So yeah, I would go to the releases part and you can actually download it doing this right here. If you just click on it, it's going to depend on what system you have. I have a M1 chip. So M1 is going to be different from, this one says universal. I believe this is going to be Intel. No. This is going to be Intel. This is going to be the M1. I believe this M64 thing. But once you click on it, it should download the debugger for you. And then all you have to do is click on it and open it. But it's going to vary depending on what system you actually have. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Let's see. We have another question. Make a video for socket programming in React Native. So you're trying to create like a chat application? Man, a socket application, that's going to, I might create a course for that one because that's like, what are you trying to do with sockets? Are you trying to create like a messaging app? And Kit, I'll wait for your response. Anybody else, make sure you ask your questions. But anyways, until and Kit responds, I'm going to go back to the review of the code that we were just doing. So yeah, basically that's how the isLoading property is used within the application and how you would actually say, for example, you didn't want to update styling. You want to make sure that loader showed every time the API called. We can go ahead and do that. It's called activity indicator. Okay. I'm going to go back and remove this. And now I can do something like this. I can say activity indicator if is loading is true. We're going to show the activity indicator. Everything's loading real super slow right now. Color. I'll just make this red because it stands out. Actually, I'll make it, I'm not sure if this will read that, so I'll go ahead and make it black. 3. And then size. Make it large. Lastly, we got our colon. Now I'm going to pass everything that I have right here, or everything from our modal. Pass that in. Okay. Forgot to add a fragment. You have to wrap your components around a view or a fragment. Basically, if I reload this now, you see how we have that activity indicator at the top. I'll reload it again. You'll see that it actually the activity indicator will show that we're making an API call. So yeah, that's how you would use something like that. But back to what we were covering in this tutorial. So the first thing I wanted to go over was, I went over already, was how the API is being called and how our state actions get called when that happens. Now from there, if you take a look at our data, take a look at it raw. Take a look at, yeah, if you take a look at it raw, you can see there's a collection of different properties that we're calling. Once we make that API call, all of this gets called. So I'm gonna go to the application and actually get this, because it'll be easier for me to read this to you if I do it this way. So if I copy this and I'm going to post it into the web browser, for whatever reason, it's not letting me. I'm not sure why it's not letting me make this call. Oh, well, so we'll just use this then. We'll use the debugger. But basically, wish I can increase the size of this. I'm trying to figure that out. Anyways, if you take a look at the payload has a bunch of data. You don't even need all this data within the application. If you check out the app, we're only using the image, we're getting the title, we're getting the author as well. And right now we're turning about 50 different properties. So if we take a look at the app, right now within our news articles component, you can see we're getting the title, the thumbnail, and the author. And right now those properties, the author doesn't exist within this payload. This property doesn't have a author. It has a title property, but it doesn't have a author. Instead, it has a byline. So if I take a look at, if I go back to my tree, you can see this one has gang warfare as the title. And then byline is Natalia, Natalie Kitroff or something like that. And we take a look at the code. Instead of using byline, we're actually using the author. And let me make sure that we're even getting the Natalia. So one of these has to be Natalia. Yeah, right here, Natalia Kitroff or something. So the way that I actually did this is I created a custom selector. So if we go to our selectors, and also, do you guys want to have this code? I can send you the GitHub repo and you can have access to all this code and it'll be easier for you to review it and follow along. Just leave a comment and let me know what you think. Now, if we go to the selector, you can see that within the selector, we have our article. We get our article's image right here within our media. We're getting our title from the title property, and we're also getting the author from the byline property. The URL, when we press this, we're going to save our article. Well, first off, let's take a look at the action. Right now, we have an action that allows us to save articles and to view them on our save screen. If we go back and then I select one of these articles, ask me, do you want to save this article? I'll say, okay. And now we just triggered our save articles function. We just triggered our save articles action. And if we were to go back to the app, you can see now, not only that, we opened up the article within our web view. Now, if I close this, go to my saved articles, now we have this article in our saved articles. Let me take a look at some of the, if you have any questions about what I just covered, feel free to ask. So stop. I never created a tracking application myself, but I'm curious. As far as WebSockets, when I first started as a React Native developer, we were creating a messaging app for one of the medical companies that I was working for. And we use, well, part of the conversation was, do we use a third party or do we want to use sockets? And as far as I know, I've only seen sockets being used messaging, but as far as tracking, I'm curious. What kind of tracking are you going to do within the application? I'm pretty confident that you want to do more than like track a person's actions that they take place in the application. You're trying to do a little bit more. So I'm a little curious about that. But anyways, if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to continue. Also, if you have any career questions, go ahead and ask as well. Okay. So I'm curious, are you guys comfortable using Redux? Are you familiar with Redux? Do you know what Redux is? Okay. So back to the tutorial. So if we go back to and I want to say this. Let's see, get status. I want to share this with you guys. All right, so I'm going to post this within the chat just in case you want to check out some of these just in case you want to look at the code as I'm talking. I think it'd be easier to know what's going on. I know Redux, but I'm comfortable, but I'm not comfortable using it. Why aren't you comfortable using Redux? Because right now I'm doing a tutorial on Redux. So let me know exactly why, and I can actually cover it for you. Okay. So Reggie, just to give you some background, Doug, go ahead and let me know why you're not comfortable using Redux, what it is that's tripping you up, and I'm going to respond to Reggie's comment. Also, and Kit said he's very comfortable with Redux Thunk. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this, but right now, let me see if I go ahead and I refresh my emulator. This is for share my screen real fast again. This is for Ankit. So this is what's weird that I just found out about just doing this tutorial. Once I shake, now there should be some kind of warning. You see, we have this warning right here, the object notation for create slice. So it's saying that the object notation for create slice extra reducers is deprecated, which is, it's going to be new. I just brought this up to some developers for the company I work with. And basically, they're moving everything to the Redux toolkit. Now, if you're not familiar, especially if you're a beginner, I don't expect you to know what that is. But right now, there's another competing dependency called, what is it called? Oh man, I can't even think of things like Redux. I can't even think about it, but it's competing with Redux Toolkit, RTK, is to help you compete with RTK. React Query. Yeah, so RTK is competing with React Query, and it basically allows you to cache your API data. So I think that Redux is trying to throw our React Query, basically throw it out of the competition, throw it out of the conversation, and by using the RTK query. Once I get more familiar with RTK query, I'll go ahead and do a tutorial on that. It's fairly new, and I haven't used it professionally, but it's definitely in the works right now. So basically, the reason I brought that up is because of your comment. I'm comfortable with Redux Thunk, but it looks like Redux is going to be moving away to something a little bit more, something different. All right, Reggie. So as far as terminology, man, let me go ahead. I'm going to explain this to you. So the reason that you want to get familiar with Redux and understand what it is because you need to understand state management. You need to understand how state management works within the application. So you might even be confused on what state actually is. State management is when you do anything when you update or do anything with an application. If you're using an app like Instagram and you want to like a picture, that's an action. If you're making a comment, that's an action. And you can see once you make that comment, the text updates. the application changes in some way. That's when the state of the application changes. Now you can have local state changes, which are changes that you have on a specific screen. I don't have anything here in this tutorial, but I'm going to go ahead and try my best to show this to you. All right, so if you take a look here, I'm going to remove everything that I have here. So right now I have this hook called useState. useState, the default state of this is false. I'm going to console log this. I'll say modal visible. When I first console this, right? Okay. So when I first log this, you can see that when the application first loads, the state of the application, the state of his modal is false. Now, when I open it, it's saying it's false again. So that should not have happened. I don't know why that just happened. So one of these things, it's not this that's getting called. Somewhere else, this is modal visible right here. This is what's getting called. Okay. Now if I take a look, okay, so is modal visible is true. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. So as you can see, we can see that the modal by default, the value is false. All right. So if I take a look, if I go ahead and I click on any one of these, is modal visible is going to go to true. And because it's true, the modal is now open. This is called a local state management. Because it's local, when you have any kind of state that's local, you're going to use something like this. But when you use Redux, Redux allows you to select data from your application store. So within the store, the way you can think of it is just like the way you can think of a Redux store is the same way you think of a regular store. A store has a collection of different items. You can go to a store and select different items from that store. And you as the store owner, you can decide on what the amount of different items that are available. So within my store right now, the only thing that I have in my store is a news property. I have a news property. Now within my store, if I wanted to go ahead and do something else, I'll go into my news slice, and let's say that I had another property called, I'll say count, for example. Count is 0. Now, the reason that I would even create another property within my initial state is because I want to make sure that this property can be used on this screen, or I can use a property on this screen. So let's say, for example, that I update, we'll go back to my news article, and I update my, well, hold on, let me say I'll set count. I have to create like another property called set count. I may have to create another action called set count. State. And I'll go ahead and I'll create a payload property. So count, where I update the count is I say state.count. I set it equal to payload. Payload is any data. You can pass any kind of data to your payload. Right now, the count's default state is 0. So within my news articles, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select, say on, say const count equals useSelector. I'm going to grab my state dot news dot count. All right. I'm going to go ahead and log my account. So now when I log my account, I'll put console.clear because it's easier to read. When I log my account, you can see the count is 0. Now, right now, we're not doing anything. We're not changing that count. It's 0. So if I go ahead and I create a function, well, I have to bring in my dispatcher. So I'll say import, what is it, news actions. Yes, import news actions. Bring in my dispatch. So a dispatcher is basically, a dispatcher allows you to use actions. If I were to just go ahead and say, do something like this, bring in, Pressable is already in. So if I were to say something like this, like Pressable, text, my count right here. Okay, the count, you can see it is 0. Now, if I were to do something like this, I say on press, news actions dot set count. Remember, we have a payload. If I go to my slice, it's expecting something back. We have a payload. So I'm going to go ahead and say 5. I'm going to pass in 5 just like that. As you can see, payload pop up. We're passing in the value 5. Now, if I go ahead and I press this, nothing happens. If I take a look at my React Native debugger, I press 0, nothing happens. And that's because I'm not dispatching the action. So in order to get an action actually do anything or to be called or to update its state, you have to dispatch it. So I'm going to go ahead and import. Well, I'm going to create another variable called dispatch. I'm going to set it equal to use dispatch. Now, within my dispatch function, I'm going to copy what I have here, cut it, paste in just like this. Now, when I press this, it should change. Now, as you can see, we called this action. It says news/set count. It goes from its previous state value, which was 0 to 5. Now you can see 5 is showing here. Now, if I went ahead and I went to my saved articles, save articles is using the same component, but basically because I'm dispatching an action and I'm dispatching that action using Redux, I can use this count property anywhere within the application. I know this is going to go over your head. Redux is kind of over my head when I started, but the way to understand Redux is that Redux is global state management, meaning that you can use any kind of state property anywhere in your app. If it's local, that means that I can only update the state within this screen. If I were to go here, the state wouldn't be able to transfer because it's a local state value. That was a little, that was long, but hopefully you guys understand. All right. So when I was a React developer, I was required to use it. One second. Okay. This is regarding Doug's question where he said, I know what Redux is, but I'm not comfortable using it. So I'm going to go ahead. When I was a React developer, I was never required to use it. Okay, understood. If you weren't required to use it as a React developer, how did you manage your state in your application not using Redux? Did you guys use a different type of tool, or what kind of application was it? Just curious. So I was never required to use it. Companies used to quiz me in interviews about it and knew about it, but I never used it I used it very little in my career. What kind of company did you work for, man? I'm guessing if your company, because I find it kind of odd that for a web application to not use Redux, my guess is you probably worked for a mid-sized to large-sized company with a lot of different developers. Because I've been in situations where I worked for large companies, and because I was working for a large company, they had a bunch of different developers, and I didn't touch all aspects of the app. So my guess is that other developers probably worked on the Redux side or worked on the state management side, and you worked on something else. But go ahead and leave a comment and let me know what's going on. I used to use recoil. I hope I can use recoil in React Native. I never even heard of recoil. I'm going to check that out right now. Recoil.js. Oh, not transpile to ES5. Go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what is the benefits of using recoil. Nightly builds. Build state management. Okay, it's best to use React's built-in state management capabilities rather than an external global state. But React has certain limitations. Component states can only be shared by pushing it up to a common ancestor, a parent component. But this might include a huge tree that then needs to be re-rendered, which is what you would do with context. So context can only store a single value, not an indefinite set of values. True. Each with its own consumer. But these make it difficult to code split on the top of the tree, from which leaves from the leaves of the tree where the state is used. And so we want to improve this while keeping both API and semantics behavior reactish as possible. Recoil defines a direct graph orthogonal to, but also intrinsic, and attaches its React tree. State changes from flow of the roots of its graph through the pure functions, which we call selectors and components. Simple get. My guess is, what's the benefit of using this over using just Redux? I never looked. It's actually a state management tool like Redux. Okay. What do you like about using recoil? Because you actually have experience with it. I'm not sure how much experience you have with Redux, but why do you like recoil? All right, so Doug responds with e-commerce project contracts, and I've also worked for large companies. Now I work for a small company, and I'm required to learn React Native, including Redux, which makes sense because small companies want you to wear many hats. They want you to basically know everything so they can use you in multiple different ways. So if you did contract work, you probably did contract work for a medium to large size company, and you can get away with not knowing all these different tools. Now that you're with a small size company, they want you to be able to take control and do all this other stuff. Man, I mean, I get what you're saying. I actually have a GeekMODE membership that teaches you all this stuff. If I go ahead and I check out GeekMODE, so I would expect you don't even need this course. This is the ABCs of React Native. This is React Native without the bullshit. You're past here. In the state management course, it covers Redux. I think this would be most beneficial for you because it'll give you a good idea of how to actually connect your application to Redux. Even if you go back and watch this tutorial, I'll show you how to connect this app to Redux. So that'll give you an idea how to use it. But I promise you, Redux today is a lot easier than it was about 5 years ago, man. It's definitely got a lot cleaner since then. Recoil, let me check this out. Recoil allows you to use Atom to initialize storage, which also includes a selector and dispatchable actions. Okay, cool. However, in Redux, we can create a store using create slice and configure store, but we have to define a selector independently. True. Any React component can use the state stored in atoms with a recoil. So I think the biggest thing that you said that stands out to me, but we have to define our selectors independently. and recoil does this for you. What about your actions? Does recoil take care of the redux? How about recoil? Does recoil allow you to, does it create the actions for you, or do you have to create the actions itself? The reason I ask is because I know with Redux Toolkit, before with old school React, with old school Redux, the original, you have to create your action types and your actions itself. Toolkit, it does all that for you. How does recoil handle that? Yeah, I'm comfortable with Redux too, but the one thing I learned as a developer is that you have to be open to different tools. React, using React with Redux or React Native Redux is definitely the way to go. But I think that you should also know about other tools simply because I've worked at the first company I worked for a medical company. And at that medical company, there were developers that were about like 50 years old, engineers that were, and they worked for their companies for like 20 plus years. One guy was using Code Fusion or something like that. I think it's called Code Fusion. If I look it up, oh, I'm surprised. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Code Fusion. I think it's a code Code Fusion. Yeah, this is it. Code Fusion technology coding language. Yeah, so this is like, yeah, Code Fusion is like a 1990s like coding language. That was like, that's how you built web applications back in the day. And I'm sure that this was a thing to know, but that guy was in there for so long, using these tools for so long, that when he actually left his company, he didn't have any marketable skills. So he saw a major drop in his pay cut because we weren't using Code Fusion. We were using JavaScript. So the reason I want to know more about recoil is because recoil, I mean, you never know, but it could be the future, or because React and Redux likes to steal other libraries' tools, it may actually steal something from recoil. Code Fusion. Okay. Thanks, Doug. Doug, how old are you, man? That's what I say. If you know about that, I had no idea what Code Fusion was until this dude told me what it was when I met him. Code Fusion. Okay. I don't like MobX. I don't like MobX because, I mean, honestly, just because I'm comfortable with Redux. I believe before I can't remember what it was before Redux. I think it was like Flux. There was a tool that came out when React first came out. React and React Native first came out. You would use, I think it was Flux to control the global state of your application. All right, Doug, that explains it, man. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it was Code Fusion, man, and Doug can let you know from experience, man. I mean, as a developer, the thing that actually makes us we're only as good as what we know. I would love to work for a company for 10, 20 plus years, but honestly, it's from what I can see, there's no loyalty. Companies don't show the developers loyalty, and then also if you're a developer and you have a family, you have all this different stuff. Tech is always changing, and you're hurting yourself by not being open to other areas. Maybe take contract work on the side to get familiar with certain tools. And also check out what Bree said, man. Get the likes up. Go ahead and get the likes up, man. I'm giving you all this free information. I've never used it. I've never used it, but I used to see job postings whenever I used to apply for programming jobs. Okay. I can't remember, Doug. Did you say what your okay? You worked on e-commerce projects. Okay, work for large companies now. Have you been a hey Doug? Have you been a web developer your entire career? All right, so I'm gonna go back to the tutorial shortly. It's the review. I left a link to the repo so that you can study the code and ask questions. I'll go ahead and I'll post the link again. I'm going to go back to the tutorial. So we've already covered Redux. One thing we did not cover is selectors. So I'm going to close all this out. We'll close this part out. And here. So by default, when you're using Redux Toolkit, when you're using Redux within your application, by default, it comes with a function called useSelector. So useSelector itself is a selector. The problem with it is that it allows you to select data. It allows you to select data directly from the state. You can see we go into the state. We're going to get our news. We're going to reference the news property, and we're going to get our count. So that means that every time the state of the application changes, this right here will get re-rendered. This will get like recalculated, and it could potentially slow down your app if you have a lot. If you have a lot of data that you're selecting from your store. Now, the way to get around that is by creating your own custom selector. So right here, you can see that I created 3 selectors. I have my select data selector where I get from the news. And I also have my select saved articles, which I get from my news property as well. And then here is where I actually use the create selector function. And I pass in my selected data and then I mutate it. Now, the only reason you will want to do this, you don't need to create your own custom selector all the time. The only time you want to do that is when there's any kind of computation or any kind of processing that you're going to do with data. For example, let's say that we're on our screen, we were going to select our count from our Redux store. This right here doesn't do anything because we're not mutating that data. We're just selecting whatever that value is. But let's say, for example, that we wanted to select the count and then mutate it. Now, the reason we will create a custom selector is because our selector, like I said, this changes every time there's a change to our state of our application. This gets called. So I can actually go ahead and go like this. If I bring in my use effect, and what this is going to do, whenever the screen loads, it's going to check out this count property and it's going to reprocess it. So right now I'm going to grab my count and I'm going to say count plus 100. It's going to create a new function called new count, or a new variable called new count. This is going to be dependent on the count. So let me bring in. These are horrible names, but hey, just bear with me. And I'll say set the count. Now I'm going to set the count. I'm going to pass in the new count. I'm going to console log this. Let's log my new the count. All right, so let me take a look here. Not logging in the right area. Okay, now I'm going to refresh this again. So what's happening is here, you can see right now we're getting our count from from our store right here. Our count is coming from our store. Now, every time the app reloads, it's going to do this computation, and it's going to every time the app reloads, it's going to do this computation is going to update the state of the app. This isn't something that you want to you don't want to have these types of processes or functions that happen all over your application. Let's say, for example, we had about 5 different state properties that we were updating within the screen. That could potentially slow the app down. So to get around that, you would create your own selector. So let's say I create a selector called export. Well, first I'll create my count. Export const select count. I'm gonna get my count property from the state. State.news.count. Now let me go back here, bring back in my import select count. So there's no difference between my select count and what's here. If you remember, the select count is basically returning the count. So I'm going to go ahead and just say select count. What is going on? Selectors. Oh. Okay. So right now the select count, there's really no major difference. The only biggest difference, instead of plugging this in, I'm actually just passing in my select count selector. Now I'm going to create my own custom selector. So I'll say export const select count plus 100. Well, I'll just say plus. So I'll reference my create selector. Now within your create selector, you can pass in an array of selectors. It doesn't matter what the amount is. It just depends on what you want to do with it. I'm going to pass in my select count. Now, next, our combiner. My select count is a count property. So I'm going to reference my count. And then I'm going to, well, hold on. Now within my callback function, I'm going to set my create a variable called, I want to say 100. Call it 100. Set it equal to 100. And here, I'm going to have my count plus, we'll have 100 equal 100 plus my count. And lastly, I'm going to return my count, or return 100. Okay, now when I go back here, instead of doing all this stuff in this effect, let me get out of here. I'm going to select plus. It's a horrible name, but just bear with me. And within, I'm going to create another variable called 100. And I'm going to say use select count plus. All right, so I want to remind you, the biggest difference between these two is the computation. Right now, because we're not even doing anything to our count, it doesn't hurt to, we don't need to create a custom selector. We're not mutating this data in any kind of way. We're just going into our state, our news property, and we're grabbing our count. Now the difference is that within our count, our select count plus, we're mutating this, we're changing it. So because we're making this mutation, we don't want to do this every time the screen reloads. Using a create selector, it actually caches it caches the state. It caches the count property. It caches the counts value. So this will not get re-rendered unless the count itself changes, as opposed to using the select count. This updates whenever the state changes. That means if saved articles updates, if data updates, the state is going to reload, and then it's going, because it's reloading, it's going to get this count value again. But what create selector does is that it caches this count value. So it's going to cache it at the count is 0 right now. It caches the count of 0. And it's going to reprocess all this stuff here. And then every time the screen loads, what it does is it looks at the cache value, which is 0, and then it compares it to the state value, which is 0. If both of those values are the same, it doesn't even bother to actually compute all this stuff again, because both of those properties have the same value. Now, let's say, for example, that there was a change to the count in some kind of way, and the cache value within your selector is 0, but the state value is 5. Because the state value is not identical to the cached value within your selector, the selector is going to update its cache value with the state's value, and it's going to reprocess all that information again. Hopefully that makes sense. Make sure you get the likes up. Okay, Doug, full stack. I'm honestly, man, I'm done being a full stack developer. I did at my first company, I worked as a full stack developer. I was React Native based, but on the back end, we used Express. We used a Node, and we used this other library called Sequelize. It helped us basically connect our API to our Microsoft SQL Server. Good evening, sir. I sent my I got your message on Discord. I saw what you sent me. I just haven't had time to review it. I saw that you sent it to me earlier this morning. I actually had practice this morning, and then right after practice, I rushed here for this video. So I'll check it out as soon as I can. I'll check it out by today. Can you switch to dark mode on your emulator? Not in this tutorial, because in this emulator, it's not set up for dark mode. If I do that, I would have to look it up and change it, man. That's the truth. I would have to check out and look into it. So that's what I plan on doing with your project. I was going to pull it, study your code, and then basically inform you why your safe area view thing isn't working the way that you want it to work. Let's go ahead and take a look at my LinkedIn. So I'm going to share my screen. What do you need to know before applying to a React Native job? I actually interview React Native developers for my company, but I'm going to take a look at my LinkedIn. And go ahead and add me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. So let me see. A lot of these companies, they ask for the same thing. A lot of times it's recruiters who don't really understand React Native. I'm reaching out because I'm currently working for a hypertech health tech company, platform finder. Because it's going to depend on what level you're at as a React Native developer for you to actually get comfortable. 180 hip hop media interested. My client is hiring senior full stack engineer. So check this out, man. I was hoping that there were more junior roles. Actually, yeah, let me take a look at these jobs. So what you need to know is going to vary based off of your experience level. If you're a junior developer, if you're a senior developer, or if you're like a senior third level developer, it's going to vary, and they're going to test you differently. So I would say, to answer your question, what do I need to know before applying to a React Native job? And I'll use my tutorial, for example. What you want to know when you apply to a React Native job, they're going to test you. They're going to test your ability to get API data. So that's what you should be prepared for. When you have your interview, most likely they're going to have like a coding challenge. They're going to give you an API that you need to know. They're going to give you API. You need to know how to use that API to get that data. So the tool that I would actually use is Axios. If you're not familiar with Axios, this is how it's basically, this is the dependency. Let's say Axios React Native example. Yeah. So basically, I would take a look at this right here. This is the first thing you need to know. You need to know how to make an API call and get data. Here's an example. Axios is calling this endpoint. I'm going to copy this right here. Okay, so this is all, most likely this is all they're going to do. They want to see if you can make an API call and to get this data to show on your screen. So the first thing you'll do is you'll get this data. And once you have that data, most likely you'll have to use some kind of like, they want you to use hooks. They want you to be familiar with use state and use effect. Right here it has a component did mount. What you're going to want to know how to do is this. I'll create a new component for you. So I'll say, let me go to my app.js file. Actually, let me go to my home screen. Yeah, I'll just run through this because I actually just interviewed this guy this week. So I'm going to comment all this stuff out right here. And I'll bring in a view and a text. So I'll say view. Share my screen. Okay, and that's what I expected to happen. Text. All right, so the first thing you want to know how to do is this. You're going to want to, I'll comment this out as well. They're going to ask you, do you know how to use hooks? I promise you they'll ask you that. And the hooks that they expect you to know how to use is use state and use effect. Use state, use effect, they'll ask you what is it used for? What is it? You can just say it's like a life cycle method. If you take a look at this example, it uses the function called component did mount. Back when React Native first came out, even React, they used class-based components. And then within the class-based components, I actually think is better. But in the class-based components, you were able to control how your application was how the application state updated using these lifecycle methods. Now companies are moving to functional-based components. So you don't even want to, they're not going to expect you to know how to use any of this. They don't even care. They want to know if you know how to use hooks. So like I said, I copied this example. I'm going to go ahead and create a use effect. I promise you, this is exactly what they want you to do. And I think, do I not have Axios imported on here? Okay, Axios. So I'll go ahead and I'll create. So this is my first effect. I use the use effect, and then now I'm going to create another. I'm going to create a variable data and set data using what's a use state. The default value is going to be an empty array. So right here with Axios, once you make your API call, you're going to say .then your response. I'm going to go ahead, instead of updating everything right away, I'm going to console log response. And the response should be identical to what we saw in the web browser. So if I console log this response, take a look at my debugger, you can see the response right here. The response has a few different properties. It has config, it has its headers, it has request, status, all this good stuff. All we want is the data. the data returns all this stuff that we see here: Leanna, Irving, Clementine. And I'm sure if I take a look at the web browser, it's going to say, yep, Leanne, Irving, and Clementine. So what it wants you to do is they want to say, okay, can you make an asynchronous call? Can you make an API call and get data return? I just showed you how to do that. Now they're going to ask you, how do you get that data on the screen? From there, all you're going to go ahead and do is say response. You're going to say set data, going to pass in the response dot data. Okay. From there, now we're going to console log the data. You're going to do this in your interview. You're going to console log the data just so that they can see that you know how to get data from the API and you know how to show it on your screen. So once you do that, they're going to say, oh, wow, okay, you have your data. Your data property has been, your data variable has been updated with all the data. Now that you have your data, you're going to go ahead and use this flat list. You're going to pass in your data. And then within your flat list, or within your render item, this is where you render your data. I'm going to say item. You always have to use the item property or else it won't work. Turn text. And right now, the item property, if I console log this, the item for you, this is how it looks. Out of here, remove all this stuff. Okay, so I'm console logging my item. If I take a look, you see item right here. Item, it comes with all these different properties. And all I want you to get to show on the screen is the name. Most likely the company will say that. It'll say, hey, we have, like I had a company, they said, oh, we have all this, an API that returns a bunch of Star Wars data. All I want you to do is return the name of the Star Wars characters. They'll say something like that. And as you can see, there's a name. So I'll go ahead, I'll go into my text, and then I'll say item dot name. I believe that was what it was. And then now I have all these people names on the screen. So they're going to test your ability to make API calls, to know what hooks are, and to basically get that data to show on the screen. I do have to take off, but the next thing that they're going to ask you to do, they're going to see if you can pass this data to another screen. And you would use that using React navigation. I'll cover that next week's video. I have to get out of here because my good friend of mine is moving back to, where is it? Vietnam. So he's moved back to Vietnam. This is last year, last semester in college. He's going to be in Vietnam at the end of December. So I'm going to go hang out with him. There's one more question. LinkedIn link. My LinkedIn link appears to be broken. I'm going to post my LinkedIn right now. Okay. Make sure you like the video. Everybody, if you're watching it, you're getting this free game. Make sure you like the video. And I'm going to answer one more question by Doug. Do you have courses on teaching React hooks? I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. Doug, I set up my my membership for somebody who's completely new to React Native and they want to learn it from the beginning, from the ground up. So if you're going to learn hooks with React Native, the best way to go to learn hooks, what's the best one? Because you'll learn it in state management. I'll say the best courses are not these two, because this teaches you just everything plain React Native. It does use hooks in this course, but I would say that the React Native state management, full stack React Native, and TypeScript with React Native uses hooks like heavily. So these three courses, and yeah, it's $50 a month, man. I mean, you can watch all these videos in a week if you want to, but I don't think that's going to be helpful. But these three courses right here will teach you how to use hooks. I think this would be beneficial to you because you are a full stack developer. So in this course, I actually teach you how to build your own API using MongoDB, You host your API using Heroku. Mongo, you use Mongo Atlas to actually, Mongo Atlas is a GUI interface you can use to view your database. But I basically teach you how to build a RESTful API using Express and MongoDB. And I teach you how to use that application. You set up your database locally, and you also set it up publicly. And I teach you how to basically create your API from the ground up and using on your React Native applications. So I think with somebody with your experience would benefit from this, because you would understand it at a way better level than somebody that's just new to development in general. But yeah, these 3 courses: React Native State Management, Full Stack React Native Development, and using TypeScript with React Native. All right, guys. Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it. I love what I do. I love teaching. I love meeting new developers. Make sure you add me on LinkedIn. That way we can stay connected. And also make sure you subscribe to the Discord. If you need to reach me directly, Discord is the best way to do that. Anyways, like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Peace.